Our story takes us to a scene of a young man by the name of Jeho, standing in a crowd listening to an announcement of a new immersive VR game. Introducing New World. The perfect immersive virtual reality game promises glory, honor, power, and knowledge. Splendors beyond one's wildest dreams. Jeho with a clenched fist thinks to himself, "Now I can open a flower shop." The scene then switches to Jeho in a gym with his friend running on the treadmill, while telling his friend about his dreams of one day opening a flower shop, which his friend reiterated to him in excitement, to which Jeho shushes him to keep quiet. His friend then told him that his dad is not there as he had already left. We then learn that Jeho's dad is the owner of the gym, who is perceived as a macho man and despises any form of weakness. As Jeho states, even just at the sound of the word flower his dad will start foaming at the mouth. His friend then starts teasing him about his dreams of opening the flower shop when he's so macho, and has an intimidating aura around him. This is misconstrued as Jeho has a resting skull look on his face even when he's in a great mood. Jeho's friend then asks, "Why not just be an MMA fighter like his dad wanted?" As most customers are even afraid to look Jeho in the eye. He then reminds him of an incident that happened in high school 5 years ago. We then see a flashback of Jeho when he was in high school 5 years ago, when two mobsters busted down the front door of the gym. The mobsters screamed to see the gym's owner on the account of conducting illegal business in their neighborhood. This was all in an attempt to extort the gym. They, however, were met by Jeho, who the mobsters demanded to pay a protection fee or else the business would shut down. Jeho was on his phone listening to music with his earplugs in and his back turned to the entrance, and didn't notice the two guys. One of the mobsters then grabbed Jeho by the shoulder, stating that Jeho was being rude and should remove the earphones and face them. Jeho then stood up, and his intimidating silhouette and his aura were so massive the men began to sweat profusely. Jeho then took out his earphones and greeted them as he did not notice them come in. However, in the men's eyes they thought Jeho was pissed and was ready to harm them, so they quickly changed their minds and instead asked for gym memberships. The scene then ended with Jeho thinking to himself with a deep look in his eyes. Jeho's friend reminds him that every plant he interacts with just ends up dying, and although he would like to support him, he doesn't believe that this is meant to be. Jeho then reminds him that is why he will do it in the new game. According to Jeho's friend, despite rumors of the game offering endless possibilities, opening a flower shop would be a feat only Jeho would ever be dear to dream of. Jeho then stated that nothing is wrong and many people play the game only to fish all day. Jeho's friend said that that is true, however, how would Jeho even be able to play the game without his dad not finding out? And that Jeho would lose gains while being plugged into the capsule. However, Jeho doesn't plan on giving up that easily and says he would move out if needs be. His friend then reminds him that he has no money to do so and that he would need money for rent and also to buy a capsule as well as to pay off his outstanding student loans. But Jeho hasn't wavered, saying he could just rent a capsule room for the moment. His friend then encourages him to try it, and he even invited him to join him in the capsule room he currently plays at. Jeho was surprised to hear this and wasn't sure if his friend meant it or not, but was excited about the chance. The scene later skips to Jeho and his friend at the New World capsule room, where Jeho is seen visibly nervous, and his friend asking him to behave a bit more naturally and not to act like that, as they may be perceived as complete noobs. The two then select a capsule, and his friend instructed him to select Kruma as his starting area, as he also started in that area in the past. However, Jeho was skeptical as Kruma is a desert, and there was no way he could become a florist in a desert. His friend later explained to him that Kruma was the easiest starting area for newbie players, and that once Jeho leveled up he can then pursue his dream of opening his flower shop. Jeho's friend then warned him that if he thought of starting in Luxie Forest, it is equivalent to a death sentence. Jeho, however, was thinking of starting in Luxie Forest, and was surprised to hear the bad news. However, it was too late, and he had already selected Luxie Forest as his starting point. Luxie Forest was notorious in New World as a living hell, as many unfortunate players chose this as their starting area and had no chance of resetting their starting area and or resetting their existing characters. In an online forum of the game, Players were seen expressing their misfortune of selecting Luxie Forest as their starting area and were seeking help, however to no avail, as other players' only advice was to instruct them to create a new account, as the game doesn't allow for the creation of additional characters, and players were advised to subsequently rage quit. The players then mocked the newbies for making it harder on themselves for starting in Luxie Forest, as they would either end up trapped forever and unable to carry out any of their starting quests due to the angry elves that lived in the forest, and the players would end up having to hire some high-ranking players for a few $1,000s to get them out. Jeho was not listening, however, and his friend realized that and was surprised that he went ahead and chose Luxie Forest. But Jeho was already cramming his huge body into the capsule, which made him look too large of a person sitting in the middle seat of an aeroplane. His friend realized that Jeho was not listening to him and suggested that he needed a bigger capsule. However, Jeho stated that he was okay. His friend gave him a last word of warning not to choose Luxie Forest and to meet up with him at Kruma if he wanted to play the game, as he may never make it out of that devil of a forest. And as the capsule closes, he shouted his ID to Jeho, and the game started. A screen pops up with the instructions to select a server and a starting area and to enter your ID. The controls are via touch. The character customization is locked. And now we are ready. New world. In the blink of an eye, Jeho or his player name Althea is taken to the starting area of his choice. And can anyone guess it? Yes, Jeho is indeed in the new world at the paradise of the elves, the luscious paradise dubbed Luxie Forest, the place only he was warned against and warned never to enter. Jeho looks around at the forest, and then remembers to contact his friend when he entered the game. A window then pops up which shows that to send a whisper to his friends, he would only have to press and speak. Jeho then contacted his friend, whose name we now learn is Wansik. Wansik sends him a whisper with the player ID, Mr. Swole. Wansik was surprised at Jeho's player ID, Althea, as Jeho has a more terrifying demeanor. However, Jeho reminds him that unlike him he did not choose a player ID as absurd as Mr. Swole. Wansik then changed the topic and asked for Jeho's location, as he was currently in Kruma's starting hall and hasn't seen Jeho. Jeho then fell silent, and his friend realized what he had done. You started in Luxie Forest, didn't you? Asked Wansik. Jeho then pretended he was lagging to try and escape the situation. However, Wansik explained that New World doesn't have lagging issues and resumed interrogating Jeho. A system notification then pops up showing that Jeho had blocked player Mr. Swole. Jeho then sighed in relief as he doesn't have to hear Wansik's nagging. Jeho thinks to himself that he has made the right choice, as he had read on the online forums. As there is barely anyone around, Jeho is glad as the forest is full of flowers, and then decides to get started by getting his body used to the game. He then begins to do squats, when a voice from behind calls to him. The person then thinks to themselves that Jeho is just another poor unfortunate soul that has arrived in Luxie Forest. He then begins to approach Jeho, seeking to recruit him to join the Forever Luxie Association. As he reached out his hand to touch Jeho, he was noticed by Jeho, who turned around with a scowling look on his face. The stranger was taken aback, as Jeho stood up and in an intimidating voice said, "I've been waiting for you. Shall we begin?" The stranger was terrified of Jeho's massive physique and started sweating, as he was scared and confused as to what Jeho meant by starting what. He then thought Jeho was getting ready to do a PvP match with him, so he quickly backed off and bowed his head and apologized to Jeho, saying he doesn't do PvP matches, then proceeded to run away. Quick note. PvP is short for a player versus player match. Jeho was confused as to what was happening, as he had thought the stranger was a tutorial NPC and wondered to himself what the hell was the Forever Luxie Association. Quick note. NPC is short for non-player characters or in-game characters controlled by the system. Jeho thinks to himself about the interaction that it was strange, however quickly moves on as he thinks of the many possibilities that he can do in the game of New World. Jeho then spots some flowers alongside him. The flowers were blue and shimmering with lights emitting their petals. Jeho then thinks to himself, "Now I can finally open a flower shop." He then begins to sniff the flowers and exclaimed that now he can finally smell them with no allergic reaction whatsoever. Jaeho then picks up some of the flowers, expressing how real they felt, and describes the feeling as being in heaven. However, to everyone else, he seems like a demon emerging from hell. A notice then pops up stating that Jaeho has gained a new skill called botany. Botany will allow players to learn the names of the plants they interact with. Jaeho was so happy to learn that, and thought the skill was cool and that it was made for him. Jaeho's botany level has gone up to level 5 as we see him observing more flowers. A system notice then pops up stating that he has discovered new information on the plant he was observing, and in addition, more information will become available as he increases his knowledge of the plant. Jaeho was then granted the title of Innocent Observer. This title allows for Jaeho's speed to increase wherever there are flowers. He then obtained the title Do You Like Flowers? This title grants the user to have an increased ability to befriend flowers. In addition, he was granted the title of Budding Botanist. This title opens up Althea's plant journal, and this information on the plants studied will be recorded in the plant catalog. Jaeho trembled with excitement, and screamed that this is exactly what he wanted. In the meantime, another unfortunate soul arrived at Luxie Forest because just like Jaeho, despite numerous warnings, curiosity won out over danger. This was due to the rumored elves that lived in the forest. Despite the sight of no other players and the reputation of the forest, the new player only wanted one desire: to become friends with elves. The player was then startled by a sound in the bushes and was noticed to be visibly scared, then wondered to themselves if the sound could be that of elves. They then heard a roaring sound and a beast-like man screaming in the distance from the tree they hid behind. The player was surprised to see that it was not a monster but. 5 minutes later in the New World game forum, the player posted the sighting of a strange man in the Luxie Forest making weird sounds. They then wondered where were the rumored elves that were supposed to have been there, and wondered what was happening. Other players started commenting that all the NPCs in Luxie Forest were elves and that the new player should just follow the road and they'll eventually run into them. Another player commented that the new player was screwed the moment they chose Luxie Forest as their starting area. Other players were shocked that they would choose Luxie Forest and began to laugh. We then learn that the name of the new player is May, and the scene ends.